12:30 on this beautiful Monday, and we are certainly very honored and pleased to have the opportunity to talk with our state representative here for just a bit on this 19th day of October. As we say, good afternoon to John Wray. It's good to have you in studio. We actually thought at first we were going to be doing a little telephone conversation. Always better to have you here in person.
Yeah, it's always good to come in and see you, Ken. So I enjoy the opportunity to visit with you and with your listeners.
And a lot of folks may be thinking, well, you know what, the session, your first session ended, and maybe wondering what's going on. But, you know, we've been hearing, and at least our listeners have been hearing some talk about a number of propositions that's going to be on the constitutional election ballot because a lot of those folks are running ads on the Texas State Network. Right. But by and large, I think we all know that as far as the public is concerned, it's kind of hard to get them jazzed about propositions that show up in the constitutional election ballots.
You know, it really is, and these types of elections have historically very, very poor turnout. So I appreciate this opportunity to get out and talk a little bit about it, and hopefully get people get a little knowledge out there so that people are more interested in the election and they'll actually show up and exercise their right to vote.
I think you will find that what's crazy about that is for the few people that do take the time to do that, so many of these have really broad-ranging and reaching effects on everyone. We'll talk about those, and then some of those maybe that are a little more directed towards a certain particular group. But starting off with the first one, we're looking at a change to the homestead exemption.
Right. And there are, and just before I go into that in detail, there are 7 propositions total. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. But as far as the most broad reaching is probably Proposition 1 and Proposition 7. They sort of bookend these 7 propositions. But specifically with reference to Proposition 1, that is a proposition that would raise the homestead tax exemption from $15,000 to $25,000, a mandatory $25,000 homestead exemption that school districts would have to offer each Texas homestead owner. And that would effectively lower the tax burden for homeowners out there. It would impact, ostensibly, it would impact school district revenue, but the state is going to make up that revenue gap. So whatever revenue is lost by our local school districts will be made up from the state treasury so that the school district really does not feel any impact on their bottom line, but taxpayers should see an impact on their bottom line of having a lower property tax bill.
Yeah, that was some of the big questions was, well, we're okay with getting a break on our property tax. What's going to happen with the district? But since the state, as part of this, has said they won't be losing any money. We're going to cover the gap on that too.
That's exactly right.
It makes a big difference on that, and property tax always seems like it's one of the issues that comes up too because it affects so many here in the state, and I think it's one of the things that attracts folks to the Lone Star State too, is that we're so conscientious about that.
One of many things.
Some of the other things, I mean, Proposition 2 exempts property from taxation for surviving spouses of totally disabled veterans, and I think most people are on board with that idea.
A little bit more of a specialized proposition. It actually is a cleanup from a proposition passed by Texas voters in 2011, and which allowed an exemption for disabled veterans who are 100% disabled. There was a little bit of a gap as far as surviving spouses of veterans who died before 2011 when this was first enacted. And what this proposition does is just clarify that surviving spouses of veterans who died before 2011 are also entitled to this exemption.
So that it's not just targeting a certain group, but it becomes kind of retroactive for them too.
Exactly.
One that people are not going to know whether it ever passes or not, but I think it's kind of interesting too, is Prop 3, because it's talking about repealing a requirement that certain executive officials actually reside in the state capitol while in office. What even brought this about?
Sure. There's 29 statewide elected officials total in Texas, certain of whom are constitutionally required to live in Austin, to make their home in Austin. And certainly if you're a statewide elected official, you're almost certain to have some type of home in Austin. But a lot of those folks also keep their home back in their hometown, where they originally grew up or where they were elected from or where they were living. They may have their kids still in school in that hometown. And those folks generally would like to be able to still claim that as their home to register to vote there in their hometown so that they can participate in those elections locally. And there's various other reasons, but that's essentially the gist of it. It doesn't really necessarily serve any specific purpose that they have to officially make their home in Austin. They, of course, are still going to have a home there, most likely, but they also get to continue to register to vote and claim their homestead back in their
So it really is an effort almost to have within the state a dual residency that way, and that way they can still be active in their original hometown while still fulfilling the requirement to.
Really conforms the law to what reality really is for most of these elected officials.
Now, one that I know our listeners have been hearing a lot because of the Nolan Ryan ad's been running quite a bit on this next proposition that has to do with professional sports teams and allowing them in their charitable foundations to conduct charitable raffles and be able to have more money to the various charities they like to support.
Right, and we have the law in Texas is that gambling is illegal. Raffles are included within that definition of being illegal gambling. There have been over the years various carve-outs to allow charitable raffles and things of that nature. Professional sports teams, their charitable foundations are currently not included within the ambit, so to speak, of those exceptions, those carve-outs to the gambling prohibition. This would fix that. And a lot of our professional sports teams here in Texas, we're blessed to have quite a few. They do leverage their popularity and their attendance and their fan base to raise money for various charities, and this certainly seems like an appropriate way to raise money for charities.
And this is why we're glad to have our State Representative John Wray in, because for those who have heard the ads, it almost makes you wonder, well, what's going on? They never mention anything about the raffle or the gambling aspect. They just say, hey, we want our sports teams to be able to give more to charity, and so now you know the specifics of that too, and just helps legalize some things for them for a good cause, and I think most people will probably be okay with that too.
Right.
Let's talk about the next proposition, which has to do with transportation, right?
It does. Again, this is a specialized proposition that really doesn't have a specific impact on our county. It would allow counties with a population of 7,500 or less to conduct maintenance on private roadways. You know, out in some of these smaller counties and rural areas of Texas, the county commissioner goes out and does some work, some grading or some dirt work, etc., on a county road. There may be a stretch of private roadway as well that the county commissioner currently can't use his equipment on. And I want to emphasize that this would not be done at taxpayer expense. In all places where this is done on private roadway, that the private landowner, the owner of that road, does reimburse the county government for that work, and that will continue to happen, of course. This just allows a common sense approach to road maintenance in some of our more rural areas of Texas. I'm
guessing too, John, with the size of our state and the state population continuing to grow, this really affects a lot of those counties in the Big Bend area, sparsely populated. I'd like to know the last time Ellis County had fewer than 7,500 people in it, so there's more counties this won't affect than will.
That's absolutely right.
All right. I know we got a lot of hunters and fishers out, the hunter and fishermen out there. Proposition 6 kind of is the one that really has to do with those folks.
Yeah, this establishes the right to hunt and fish and harvest wildlife in Texas as being the preferred methods of managing wildlife in the state. Approximately 20 other states have similar constitutional provisions in their state constitutions, and we wanted to recognize that important aspect of Texas life here in our Constitution, or Texas way of life here in our Constitution. This constitutional amendment would not affect laws related to trespassing or property rights or eminent domain. It just establishes that as Texas continues to legislate wildlife management, that hunting and fishing will continue to be our preferred method of wildlife management.
And there we know that there are certain species that we have to be conscientious about, and at the same time, forever, we've had folks who maybe aren't even pro hunting necessarily, but they say that really certain species, if you didn't hunt them, we would have a big problem with white-tailed deer being one of those.
Sure.
That the disease and starvation rate would be unbelievable.
Feral hogs and white-tailed deer, et cetera, a lot of those have a large negative impact in certain areas of Texas on agriculture, and it is a good method of wildlife management to have responsible hunting and fishing.
Now, you said Proposition 1 and Proposition 7 were two that you really wanted to highlight today, so let's talk a little bit about Proposition 7, because it does have an effect with government finances, and when we start talking about sales tax and use tax, you're talking about all of us.
Right. Proposition 7 relates to transportation. As most people know, Texas is growing tremendously. Transportation is, in particular, a really important issue for our area with the two interstate highways, as well as Highway 287 and Highway 67, which cross Ellis County. And what this proposition would do would be to help address the continuing need to build more transportation infrastructure in our state. TxDOT has several years ago informed the legislature that it needed approximately $5 billion more per year to maintain current congestion levels. Of course, data is kept on how long it takes to commute from one place to another, and so in order to keep those commute times from growing any larger, they're already unacceptably too large, but to keep them from growing any larger, TxDOT needs at least $5 billion more per year. This Proposition 7 is an important step to address that. Some of the technicalities are that it would dedicate $2.5 billion of the state sales tax above the first $28 billion of revenue. So the state would collect $28 billion from the state sales tax. The next $2.5 billion would be dedicated to transportation. And that would help address that transportation funding shortfall in a significant way. The other thing that's important about this is that the amount of money that the legislature has appropriated to TxDOT tends to vary up and down depending upon the status of the economy and the status of state tax revenue. TxDOT, of course, it takes them a while to acquire right-of-way, design a project, go out for bids on the project, and get the project started. And they have said they need a more steady, predictable flow of income, and this is also designed to accomplish that result as well.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to plan projects if you're constantly having a fluctuating bottom line, and especially, as you said, in our area, how important that is, because we know we have some big projects coming up, and areas, especially along the 35 corridor, that just continue to grow in leaps and bounds. You got to keep up with the roadways so those people can get around and the transportation of goods can continue.
That's right. People move to Ellis County because we have great transportation logistics. We have good, easy access to Dallas and Fort Worth in the mid-city, so people can enter those areas for jobs and for recreational and quality of life issues. And a lot of businesses locate to Ellis County, to the cities and communities in Ellis County, because they want easy access to those highways and easy access to the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport and all of that infrastructure.
So if you knew nothing about our 7 propositions that are coming up on the constitutional election ballot, we've worked our way 1 through 7. As our state representative, you in favor of all of these?
I am. I recommend, I'm voting in favor of all 7 of these propositions. I did vote for them in the House whenever we considered these issues on whether to present them to Texas voters, and I will be voting in favor of all 7 of these propositions.
And that's straight from our state representative, John Wray, and it's always a pleasure to have you drop by and say hello and keep us informed of what's happening.
Thanks, Ken. Before I go, I did want to mention that early voting on these propositions did start today, and it goes through October 30th, and then Election Day. If you don't early vote, your last opportunity will be Election Day, which is November 3rd, Tuesday, November 3rd.
Early voting has really become in vogue, though, hasn't it? I mean, I think it's done wonders for the process. I know we'd still like to see bigger numbers showing up at the polls, but I think we've added some folks because they do have the ability to not have to wait to a certain day to vote.
That's right. Convenience is the name of the game.
And we're getting a new voters office built right here in Ellis County, too. That's going to be a nice election office.
Another exciting development, yes.
John, thank you so much. That's our state representative, John Wray, joining us on this Monday afternoon here at 1390 KBEC. Coming up, more music. Stay with us.